The next topic is checked and unchecked exception. So the best way to define this difference is checked exceptions are the exceptions which are the derived classes of exception class. Unchecked exception are the exception which are the derived from runtime exception class. So what is the difference? See, checked exceptions are being recognized by the compiler. Unchecked exceptions are not recognized by the compiler. And checked exceptions, it is mandatory either you handle it by using a try catch or by using throws keyword for that specific method. In case of unchecked exceptions, it is not mandatory to handle it or further use throws. So it is optional. If you want to handle it, you can handle it. If you want, you can use further use throws, but it's not mandatory to do that. So that is the difference between checked and unchecked exception. So what are the examples for checked exceptions? So checked exceptions, the examples are the exception class itself and SQL exception, IO exception, and which are the examples for unchecked exceptions? Yeah, most of the exception classes we have explored as of now. For example, array index out of bounds exception or null pointer exception. All these comes under unchecked exception. So let us explore it by looking at an example. See, here if you see, I am trying to throw this. Fine. Is it giving error? Yes. What it says, unhandled exception type exception. Since this is a checked exception, the compiler recognizes it. So it is mandatory either you use try catch here if you want to handle here itself, or if you want that to be handled by the invoker of the method, so you can use further. So it doesn't apply only to the main method. It can be any other method. Fine. So just to explore more on this, let's try to have a static method. Void. I'll give the name of the method as MET. And I'll try to place this code in this method. As we already know, since it is an exception, I mean checked exception, I need to either use try catch here. Okay, fine. See, surround by try catch. The exception is, or the other option is I can use throws. So when I am using throws, so it is the responsibility of the invoker of this to further use try catch here or further throws. So we have used further throws. Okay, maybe let us assume I'll try to use try catch because I am not throwing here, but the method which I am invoking is throwing. So I'll just surround it with try. Okay, so that is about the checked exception. Then you may be thinking how I can create my own checked exception. That we will be discussing in the next topic. So let me just try to run this. Okay, so it is just printing the stack trace. Fine. So first the control goes here, then it goes to MET. So this statement is being printed. So here the exception is being thrown. Generally, we should not throw the exception directly like this. Okay. So it need to be enclosed in some condition, which we already know. Otherwise, what happens is every time this method is executing, it throws an exception here. It's not the right. Okay, so you need to use some if condition or whichever. So here in this case, it never allows to have this method because it's always unreachable code. Fine. So I'm just commenting it. So there are a lot of other checked exceptions, like IO exception is there. It is in java.io. See, IO package is basically related to input output streams. Okay. So if there is any problem in inputting and outputting the data, maybe from a file or wherever, so this is the most commonly thrown exception in this package. Okay. Similarly, this is the exception which will occur when you are trying to connect the database is down or the SQL statement syntax is wrong. There can be multiple reasons. Anyway, I'm not discussing this in depth. We'll discuss in depth in the appropriate modules. Okay, so that's it about checked exception. So which is unchecked exception? See, let us assume I'll try to take this code and change it for unchecked exception. Yes, we have it here. So here what we'll do is rather than manually throwing it, okay, of course, here also we can try to manually throw using runtime exception or whichever. So we'll try to indirectly make that error, sorry, make that exception, runtime exception occur. So I'll try to create an array, okay. So I'm giving the size as 10, and here I'm trying to access the 20th element, which actually doesn't exist, okay. So here actually the exception is okay, and let me try to remove the throws. Okay, so are we getting any error here? The reason is the compiler is not aware of that. Since the array index out of bound exception is a derived class of runtime exception, and hence array index out of bound is unchecked exception. Fine. So that applies, of course, here also in case this method is being invoked, and of course, if you want to handle it, it can be handled. Otherwise, it's not mandatory. For example, I want to handle it, so I can use try, okay, and catch array index out of bound exception. I'll just try to print the stack trace. So let me try to print the stack trace. So I'm printing the stack trace. So, but it is optional. It doesn't mandate you to catch it. So you may ask me, like, when it's not mandatory, what happens? Of course, when you are not handling it, it goes here, and further whoever calls it, it goes here, and further the control goes to the JP. Okay. But it's not mandatory. So, so why it is mandatory to handle some of them? Why it's not mandatory to handle unchecked exception? Why it's mandatory to handle checked exception? Why it's not mandatory to handle unchecked exception? The reason is basically to reduce the size of the code. So the developer is provided with the option, okay, whether based on the situation, whether to use checked or unchecked. In case of unchecked, you don't handle it. It is being handled by the JP. So I'm just trying to run it. Of course, here the exception occurs because see it's going here, and okay, so the exception is occurring in this scenario. So for example, you are trying to deal with this specific. Okay. Well, I remove the print statements, so we may not get any output. But however, okay, so there is no exception scenario in this piece of. So that's it about unchecked.